Folks, the Stanley Cup Finals are now over, which means all eyes are turning to Winnipeg. Well, at least all eyes that care about the Jets and the players that they are about to trade. With the Jets now officially on the clock, what are we going to see over the next 3 weeks as the Jets await their trade fates with a lot of their top players who are on expiring deals? We'll dive into all of that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Jets fans, and welcome to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so is, of course, free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. But most of all, we just really love and appreciate your support. Now, like I said, tonight's episode, we're going to kick things off with a major discussion of the Jets now, essentially being on the clock for all of the big moves around the league. If there's any team this year that I would say is facing immense pressure to deliver in terms of a massive offseason, it's Winnipeg. There's no other team that is facing the number of expiring free agents and, the knowledge that those players all want out in the way that the Jets are. These are all critical performers at the top level for this team. Scheifele, Dubois, Hellebuyck, all of these guys are critical pieces to this team's starting lineup, which means that once they're gone, the Jets are probably going to be in a decent bit of trouble performance-wise. And so for Winnipeg, now that they're on the clock, there are a lot of questions about how the Jets are going to pull this off. Are they doing sign-and-trade deals? That's one thing that has kind of been discussed. Are they just trading them as expiring assets? What can Winnipeg even get back in return? And I think there are a number of different scenarios, but the most realistic scenario that I would not be shocked to see is that the Jets kind of trade these players as expiring assets, right? Why? Because the Jets essentially need to field as many offers as they can, and waiting until teams can start negotiating contract extensions would suddenly limit your pool of potential suitors. And I think for the Jets, that's probably not the most ideal situation. You're essentially waiting until July before teams can start entertaining the idea that they're trading for a long-term asset. Can the Jets really afford to wait that long? And can the rest of the league? The answer is probably no. Winnipeg might have to get out ahead of this and sort of gamble that the suitors that come after these players are going to be able to make the pitch separately once they've acquired them. So that, I think, is one difficult angle. The other, issue that the Jets are going to face is that there will probably be more than one trade candidate that is running up against Winnipeg's pool of candidates, and certainly offering some competition, right? Hellebuyck's not going to be the only goalie on the market. And if teams find what they feel is a reasonable competitive alternative at a cheaper price, what is that going to do to Hellebuyck's market value? We already know that when it comes to top-level goalies, it's very hard for teams to actually get fair value for, a trade option, right? Hellebuyck, even at his best, right? What can we realistically expect him to bring back in a trade? I think it's probably less than I would like, but kind of the nature of the beast, even elite goalies don't get typically the biggest returns. I don't know if that's going to be different with Helly because of who he is and because the goalie market this year wasn't great, right? You look at the available names, the performances in net, and how goalie at times was one of the most important positions that teams kind of whiffed on. Will that artificially inflate the value of somebody like Hellebuyck? I really don't know. My guess is probably not, but strange things have happened in the past. Maybe this is a season where the trend doesn't hold up. But my guess, again, like I said with the Jets having to kind of trade expiring assets as they are, I think we're going to see the most realistic scenario where the Jets maybe don't get the world's greatest return for Hellebuyck, which it's not the end of the world, but certainly for the Jets' peace of mind, I think that would be kind of a bummer. And now that the Jets essentially have like this 3-week window where they need to essentially advertise and kind of kick off the fire sale, I think the biggest question for the Jets is, can they get a reasonable return that allows them to start the process of the rebuild. I can't really see them getting good roster players back that can help. I just don't imagine that scenario is all that realistic. I know they're going to keep talking about being competitive. I know that the Jets have maintained that they're not going to rebuild or retool, but I just can't really see how that's going to happen. This team itself is at a point where they don't really have a choice. Once they lose Helly, Scheifele, and Dubois, there's not going to be anyone coming back that's going to replace their impact more than likely. So for the Jets, I think it's time to be realistic and sort of accept that over the next 3 weeks, this is basically going to be a bit of a bloodletting, and it's time for the new core to start to take shape and for the Jets to prepare for the years beyond next season. I think next season, I'm already kind of considering a wash at this point. I just don't really think the team's going to be all that good. And no matter what the Jets get back in trade, it's not going to be enough to replace the loss of what they're about to give up. So speaking of that next core, I thought I would take a stab at talking about who I think over the next few years the most important and critical players are going to be, especially from, not only the current roster, but also the future roster of players coming in through the draft. We'll dive into that in just a moment, but before we go any further, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is the perfect fit, and it's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part has to fit just right. Next time you need parts and accessories, look no further than eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part fits just right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check mark to know the parts will fit, or you get your money back. Just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game. And when you shop with eBay Motors, you'll have over 122 million verified parts to choose from. You'll be back in the game in no time. It's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for joining us again on tonight's episode of Locked On Jets. We are kind of talking about the Jets now being a little bit on the clock in terms of the trades that they need to do and how Winnipeg is going to have to somehow manufacture some very big victories out of what looks like kind of a losing situation. Now, after all of that is said and done, you're going to be left with probably a bit of a rough-looking team. But it's not about the present, right? It's not about next season. It's about the next several seasons and the future of this team. And for me, the next core is going to be a very different team than we've seen in previous iterations of the Jets. And I think there's a couple of key players for me that I'm looking to become the sort of anchors for the squad. Now, the first anchor I think is going to be very easy. It's Josh Morrissey. I know that we've talked about him in the past as a potential future captain. I think he is somebody that the Jets are going to lean very heavily on, and I would very much be excited to see him essentially become, one of the faces of the franchise and the faces of the core. We've had a couple of guys who have really worn that mantle and done a pretty good job over the years, but I think it's time to really turn the room over and allow some of the guys who have kind of been not necessarily, behind those faces, but maybe not having as prominent of a role. Maybe this is the chance for them to really seize control and take the reins of leadership over this team. After Morrissey, I think you're starting to talk more about, some of the younger players who are going to filter in here pretty soon. I think for me, Rucker McGroarty should be another guy that the Jets lean very heavily on. Personality-wise, he kind of strikes me as a guy who's going to become a natural leader. He's got a good mixture of excitement, energy. He has a very hardworking ethic, and his personality is just very magnetic. He seems like the kind of guy who's going to draw attention from fans and from his teammates, and from his performance on the ice for his collegiate team and for Team USA and stuff over the past couple of seasons. He's been pretty darn awesome. It feels like McGroarty is going to be a really special player. He's been working very hard on his skating. Already his points production has ticked up in college, so it just seems like a matter of time before McGroarty becomes the kind of player that I think the Jets are going to fall in love with. I think fans are also going to adore him. He's got, again, that sort of magnetic personality, and he has a lot of skill to burn. So I think once he sort of translates that to the NHL level, he will become one of Winnipeg's steadfast players, maybe somebody who doesn't have the craziest NHL career, but even if he has like a modest one, but still brings that leadership quality and the personality to match, you still might consider that a bit of a victory. Another player that I think the Jets really should make one of their cornerstones is Dylan Samberg. Samberg, for me, really sort of took flight for the second half of this past season. Dylan, of course, will have moments where he makes a couple of mistakes. Maybe he doesn't time a read right or doesn't quite get the interception the way he's hoping. But for the most part, he is, by and large, a defensive monster. This kid just does everything for this team on the back end. He's strong. He's physical. He makes really intelligent reads. He uses his frame well. He's mobile in possession. He does all of this stuff really effectively, and it allows anyone that you pair him with more or less to be very active and aggressive. And Dylan himself will be too. That does get him in trouble once in a while, but for the most part, he's been really good at bailing himself out and bailing the team out. And the defensive results and numbers, especially the underlying stats for him over this past season, painted him as one of the two best defenders on this team. So a really pronounced season from Samberg that I think has really put him on a pedestal and certainly put him, ahead of a number of other Jets defensive prospects, but also gives you a sign of things to come and a reason to start thinking about Samberg as a long-term player here in the Peg. Now, I think one of the other guys that the Jets are going to really turn to pretty soon is Brad Lambert. Lambert, for me, has all of the potential to be sort of the butt in seats kind of game-breaking presence that gets you players or gets you fans through the door, right? This dude has all of the skill, the confidence, and the ability to be an absolute menace. He has really taken flight since moving to the WHL, and it just seems like a matter of time before Lambert starts to translate that to the pro level. I do think he'll start next season off with the Moose, and if he does really well, especially for the first, half of the season, maybe they start thinking about him getting some NHL reps, but it's probably still 2 to 3 years away before he becomes a really consistent top six starter. But if we know anything about Lambert, it's that he has a tireless work ethic and really wants to improve, and I don't think he's going to let some time in the AHL hold him back for long. He's going to be, up with a big club soon enough, and I really can't wait to see what he does once he arrives. Now, the last player that I think the Jets are really going to, build around, and somebody who I think Winnipeg should really make a focal point of their offense going forward, is Cole Perfetti. He's kind of, I think, for me, one of the, sleepers to be excited about for the coming seasons. Cole has very quietly improved in so many facets. Sometimes he still has some puck management issues, but the work ethic is there. The defensive trackbacks are there. He forces turnovers, makes great passes. And as he starts to assume more and more responsibilities, like he got, with top 6 minutes this season, we're going to see Perfetti just continue to grow as a pro player. He already took some big strides forward as the season came along, and it's a shame that he had his season cut short this year, because it really does feel like Perfetti is starting to put 2 and 2 together more consistently, and he's, reaping the benefit of points scored. So for me, Perfetti, I think, is going to be one of the critical cogs of this team going forward, especially if he finally makes the move to center. If he goes down the middle, I think we're going to see the true genius of what Perfetti's game is built around really start to take shape at the NHL level, and I honestly can't wait, because Perfetti is just smarter than pretty much any player that I've watched over the years, and I feel like down the middle is where he's going to be able to really orchestrate and architect the plays that, we can only dream of right now. But we still need to see him take those reins, and I hope he does as one of the future faces of this core. There's probably some other players who will eventually transition into this role and become part of this next group of Jet superstars. But until then, we're going to just have to be patient and wait for those players to start to reveal themselves. But in the meantime, obviously, the Cup Finals have just finished. I wanted to give a couple of quick closing thoughts on how that series went and some fun lessons, or maybe painful lessons as it is, to take away from how the Vegas Golden Knights accomplished it in just such a short time. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're just wrapping up really quickly with some final thoughts on the Stanley Cup Finals and sort of how, Vegas went from a team that I think a lot of people were not really expecting to be as successful as they are to now becoming Stanley Cup champions in like less than 6 years. That was what ownership said was their timeline for a cup. And well, they've accomplished that. They've gotten their cup in 6 years, basically. And, with Vegas being one of those teams that I think is very frustrating and annoying because of how successful they are, I think there's some very obvious lessons that pretty much everyone around the league can take. The first is that the way NHL teams operate might not really be all that efficient. Vegas took advantage of teams that consistently helped them, out of cap situations, and took advantage of disgruntled players and really made the most of their geographic location to convince guys to come to their team. And they also built a really fun winning culture. This team just has everything that you want in a team that is trying to attract top-end talent, and they did it without having to draft it, which I think is very unique. Usually when it comes to game-breaking players, you have to get them with lotto picks, but that's not how the Knights did it. They used their geographic attraction instead on top of their routine playoff success to really attract star talent that otherwise would not be available to most teams. Eichel, I think, was a phenomenal pickup. Mark Stone, maybe even bigger, especially with how good Stone is right now. And you added that to a core that was already pretty strong to begin with. Theodore, Marchessault, Smith, all of these guys have been very, very good for the past several years. And now you just added those extra layers of elite franchise-level talent, and you didn't even have to do it through the draft. I think Vegas smartly recognized that what they had was a team that was closer to the 30s, right? Obviously not in the young version of a dynasty, but kind of more at the tail ends of the primes. And so for them, it was imperative to make the most of that existing core as quickly as possible. And they went all out, bringing top-level talents, putting themselves in cap hell, and really risking it all for the biscuit. But it ended up paying off in a big way. They're now Stanley Cup champions. They essentially slapped the Florida Panthers for 5 straight games. And so, for Vegas, mission accomplished. Now, the next several seasons might start to get a little bit dicey for this team because, let's be real, when you go all in and you cash all of your chips in, especially on players who are closer to their 30s, naturally there's going to be a limit to how far you can push that. And Vegas has been running up against the cap for several seasons now. It might not be so easy to convince teams to help get them out of the situation, but it doesn't really matter when you've already won a cup. I mean, they accomplished their objective faster than most NHL franchises could ever dream of reaching that stage. And it really shows that the rest of the league is still too hesitant, still behind the times, and not really looking at futures and assets the way that they should. And that's not to say that Vegas has been perfect. The Knights have made plenty of missteps, but I think the biggest thing was that they kind of found ways to work around those and get themselves out of losing bets. If something wasn't working, Vegas just kind of was like, well, it's time to find another option, and let's see if we can get rid of this player, even if it costs us a bit. And now here they are winning a cup in, again, less than 6 years or just about 6 years. I think that is an incredible testament to how the front office has been and how, reactive and adaptable the Knights are. And it's very frustrating because it's like they do stuff that other teams could do, other things that the Jets might even be possible, to do. And all of these teams have, for the most part, not really shown the same level of ambition, desire, and frankly, action that a team like Vegas has demonstrated. New Jersey has, LA has, I think, as well. But beyond that, there's not a ton of teams that I'm really impressed with. And I think, some of those teams obviously have very unique challenges. Winnipeg's recruiting, for one thing, has been very challenging thanks to it being in Winnipeg. And for being honest, not the happiest place for free agents. But, Winnipeg also having a bit of a toxic locker room and not being the most winning of franchises recently only hurts the perception more. And so I think it'd be really nice if the Jets can slowly change that and really turn it around with this next core. But at least in the meantime, the Jets are just going to have to be patient and watch a lot of teams like Vegas find real playoff success and likely win titles. But 3-4 years down the road, maybe that's when the Jets will finally be ready to take their shot at the crown and make a return for a deep playoff run. But let me know when you think the Jets are going to accomplish that. Drop your comments and thoughts in the section below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's show, though, that is all the time that we have. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We will be back here tomorrow with more Jets offseason content, so be sure to tune in. And as always, thanks for listening. Have a great night, and go Jets go.